last part of the 8th chapter, where he was present at the death of Stephen. He kept the coats of those that were doing the actual stoning of Stephen. We sometimes say that he held their coats, and yet I don't think we can show that from the text. The Bible simply says that they were laid at his feet, but he was giving his approval, at least, and contributing in that sense, at least, to what was being done to Stephen. In Acts chapter 9, he is introduced in greater detail. And of course, he will be one of the major players in the book of Acts. He will be one of the key men in the spread of Christianity. And his conversion becomes great evidence of the power of the gospel to change lives. Acts chapter 9, as we read about his conversion, we'll notice some things today, and we'll have to go back and forth in times to come in order to be able to get all the details that are here. You know that his conversion is recorded 3 times in the book of Acts, and each time we're given some additional details. It's recorded in a slightly different way, and so we can gain from every one of those. Now, his conversion, of course, will be a very important conversion. Every soul is worth the same, of course, but God had a great work for Saul to do. And conversion was a part of his becoming the apostle to the Gentiles and his carrying out this work. He would, of course, write, by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the majority of the New Testament. He would write these letters that we study so often, that were written to the churches and were written to individuals. He will be a great missionary in carrying the gospel to the world, and so his conversion is extremely important, and it is recorded at least 3 times in this book. It is also important to record it more than once because it was a matter that would have to be defended over and over again. He was the apostle called out of due season, and because he was called out of due season, his apostleship from time to time would be called into question. It would be needed for him to defend it and to relate again how he came to be a follower and a servant of Jesus Christ, at least to the extent that he was as an apostle. And notice in verse 1 of chapter 9, "And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. Now notice that we have in verse 1 that Saul was breathing out threatenings and slaughter. The idea here is that of a wild beast, perhaps of a bull, who is snorting before he charges. That is so provoked and so angry that he's breathing out. And Saul was breathing out threatenings and slaughter. Saul was extremely angry at Christians. He was extremely angry at those that were followers of Jesus Christ. He later will tell us that in Acts chapter 26, another record of his conversion. In Acts 26 and verse 11, he says, I punished them oft in every synagogue, and compelled them to blaspheme, being exceedingly mad against them. I persecuted them even unto strange cities. He said, I was exceedingly mad against them. I could not have been angrier with them than what I was. This was a wrath that was expelled against the church, and it filled Saul's heart. He was extremely angry against them. Paul was a passionate man even before his conversion. But before his conversion, his passion was destructive in nature. after his conversion, his passion would be a healthy type of passion. He would use his passion to build lives rather than to destroy lives. Now we see this as we move through the epistles that Paul penned. Paul will express how much he loved them. He was exceedingly concerned about them. He was exceedingly compassionate and sacrificial toward those members of the church. And so we see this man who had been exceedingly mad and having a passion that was out of control in a negative sense, to be exceedingly jealous, exceedingly concerned, exceedingly compassionate toward the church after his conversion, and using his passion in a positive kind of way. He's breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord. Threatenings, he's literally making very clear what he will do to them if he catches them. They will be slaughtered, they will be killed, they will be punished as much as they possibly can be punished. There was great fear, of course, that he was using to try to keep people from being followers of Christianity. It says he went unto the high priest. Paul was proactive. Paul was not waiting for the high priest to bring him letters, but he was going to the high priest requesting letters. These letters, no doubt, were warrants. They contained the names of individuals that were known to be followers of Jesus Christ, and Paul was given warrants literally for their arrest, warrants for their capture. And he went out into the known world seeking them to bring them back to Jerusalem that they might be tried, that they might be punished and put to death. Perhaps some of these warrants were simply generic in nature, that wherever Paul went, Paul found someone that was a follower of Jesus Christ, he could, if you will, pencil their name in and bring them back. They were generic warrants that allowed him to simply go and find whoever was a follower of Jesus Christ. But he was seeking these letters. He was leading the persecution against the church. It says in verse 2, and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. This suggests that he didn't know always the names of individuals, but he had reason to believe that there were Christians who were in Damascus, and he was going there for the purpose of capturing them. Paul's going to become the missionary to the Gentiles, and he is going to go on a number of missionary journeys. But even before his conversion, he was a missionary. He was a missionary for Judaism rather than for Christianity. He was trying and he was willing to go to the uttermost part of the earth in destroying individuals and in persecuting Christians. He thought he was doing that, of course, in service to God. But he had this missionary, this zealous spirit, even before his conversion. But it was a missionary spirit of destruction rather than a missionary spirit of salvation that it later would be. Now, when we think about Damascus, Damascus was 140 miles northeast of Jerusalem. And we've talked about, up to this point, that there's great persecution against the church, and there are individuals who have moved out of Jerusalem into the areas round about. For example, they've moved into the area of Samaria, where Philip was doing his work, which was about 40 miles away. And then we've seen as well that some of them went south. That's where Philip went down and converted the eunuch. And so we see this spreading of the gospel, both north and south. But Damascus was a great way away. 140 miles is a pretty big circle. The circle continues to expand as far as where Christians are. And as Christians begin to spread, of course, the persecution spreads. Those that hate Christianity are going to follow it wherever it goes. Now, individuals estimate that it would take about a week to travel from Jerusalem to Damascus. Now, this was a pretty good trip that Saul was taking. invested a week of his time to get up there to see if there's anyone up there who is a follower of Jesus Christ, and if so, then he is going to persecute them. Now, there's a reason why he went to Damascus. Damascus contained a large Jewish population. We know that the gospel had spread to the Samaritans. We see that in Acts chapter 8. We see it spread even to the people of Ethiopia through this Ethiopian eunuch. But in large measure, the Christians at this point are still Jews. They were, of course, recorded in the earliest chapters of the book of Acts. They were the first to convert to Christianity. And so there is still a heavy Jewish element that have converted to Christianity. And so these Jews who have been driven out of Jerusalem likely would go to another area where there would be other Jews, where there would be a heavy concentration of other Jews, and so it would be natural for them to make the journey to Damascus. This would get them outside of the general persecution around Jerusalem, but it wouldn't take them out of their comfort zone. It wouldn't take them out of the Jewish customs and out of the things that they are familiar with. It was natural for them to go to Damascus. In Damascus, we're told that there were probably 30 to 40 synagogues, which lets you know a little bit about how many Jews were there. So there were a number of places of worship in Damascus that the Jews used. We know that the Christians up to this point are also using those places of worship for meeting places and as well places to convert individuals. And so Damascus was a natural choice for these Christians, and they fled there. And Saul was, of course, anticipating that. And he thought, I will go there and see if I can't persecute Christians who have gone there. We want to keep this contained. He saw Christianity as an evil disease that needed to be quarantined, that needed to be stamped out completely. And so he is pursuing it wherever he thinks it might be. And so he is pursuing it to Damascus. He desired letters to Damascus to the synagogues. Notice the plural word used here. We're not told exactly how many, but probably some 30 to 40 synagogues. That if he found any, again, these are generic types of warrants. He doesn't necessarily have names on them, although there may be certain individuals that he was looking for, whether they be preachers, whether they be elders, whether they be key members that he's become aware of. Notice if he found any of this way. Notice how Christianity is referred to. It's referred to as a way. Now Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so these Christians were walking in the way. It is the straight and narrow way of Matthew 7:13 and 14. Christianity is a way of life, isn't it? It is more than just a religion. It is a way of life. It is the way that we live our lives, and it's called this way. Now, as far as Paul was concerned, it was a departure from what was right. It was an error. It was, of course, truth, but he didn't see it that way. Whether there were men or women. Notice he didn't care. He didn't just persecute men. He also persecuted women. It didn't matter to him. He would persecute both with equal anger. He might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. He did not kill them on the spot, but rather he bound them and he brought them to Jerusalem. He brought them so that they could be tried and so that they could be properly punished. Even though he's extremely angry at Christians, he doesn't go up there without letters. No, he goes through the proper channels. He gets the letters that he needs to have to be able to do this. He goes up, he finds them, he brings them back. He lets some kind of a sentence be pronounced against them and is, of course, okay with whatever happens to them. It says in verse 3, and as he journeyed, he came near Damascus. And suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. He's very close to being where he anticipates a great number of Christians would be. Now, who is he going to meet on this road to Damascus? Okay, he's going to meet the Lord. He's going to meet Jesus on this road to Damascus. Now, we know that God is everywhere. We understand that. We understand that He's omnipresent. But the Bible also says in Matthew 18 and verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And we know that there were Christians that were gathering together in His name in the city of Damascus. And so it is natural that as Saul drew near to that city, that he meets the Lord. Because that's a city where the Lord meets. That's a city where the Lord dwells within the hearts of His people, where He meets with His church. And so as Saul is making his way there to persecute those people, he meets the Lord. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. It says, as he journeyed, he came near Damascus. Now you can imagine the anticipation. He leaves Jerusalem. He has these letters. He's got about a week's worth of journeying ahead of him. He's nearing his destination. And you can imagine, given his nature that we read about, that his heart's beating a little faster. He's just about there. They don't expect him to come all the way up here. They think that they're safe in Damascus. They think that they are far enough away to where they're not going to be persecuted. But here he is. What a surprise it's going to be when he comes rolling into town. Now, I imagine it was harder to find a Christian in Jerusalem. That's probably why he spread out the way that he did. Because he had created such a fear, such turmoil in that general area that people tended to be pretty well concealed. They wouldn't be so concealed in Damascus. It'd be easier work. And so likely he was anticipating being able to find these Christians before they even knew that he was coming. The element of surprise. There shined round about him a light from heaven. A light from heaven. The word light that's used here is that which refers to a bolt of lightning. It's literally the sharp flash, as if lightning struck. That's the kind of light. That's the word that's used in other places to refer to lightning. And so here is Saul, who's approaching the city of Damascus, and all of a sudden there is a flash of light, as if it's a bolt of lightning, which would no doubt have gotten his attention, would no doubt have gotten the attention of those round about him. Now, we're told, and you have to compare the accounts, that those that were with him heard a sound, but they didn't hear the words. They heard a noise, but they weren't able to make out the words like Saul was. Saul has this conversation, of course. He's able to make out the word, but they saw the light, they heard the sound, but they weren't able to make it out. Obviously, this was not intended for them. It was intended for Saul. And that's why it's been made directly to him. They were there. They knew something took place. They were not blinded, but Paul was blinded. Now think about Paul being blinded. Why was he blinded? It must not have just been the stroke of lightning, because the others saw that too and they weren't blinded. It's not like a welding torch, so they weren't blinded. Why would Paul's eyesight have been affected and their eyesight not have been affected? Okay, it's how God wanted it. That's a good answer. It is how God wanted it. What did Saul see, though, that they didn't see? He saw the Lord. They didn't see the Lord. They knew something was taking place, no question about it, but the Lord didn't appear to them. They weren't to be made witnesses of His resurrection, but Saul was. You remember, one of the qualifications of being an apostle is you had to see what? The risen Lord. So Saul had to see the risen Lord, and he did see the risen Lord. And his eyes were affected as a result of that. Some would suggest that Paul, later on in life, will have difficulties with his eyes. He'll talk about writing in large letters and the other things that some even believe that was his thorn in the flesh. I guess that's possible. Although Ananias restored his sight. And generally speaking, in fact, if this isn't the case, it would be very odd that whenever someone received back something that they had lost, they received it back in great fashion, not in some kind of limited or affected fashion. When someone was healed, in other words, they were healed completely. They were healed immediately, as a rule. And so that seems to be the case when Ananias brought his sight back, that his sight must have come flooding back. And I don't really see a lingering effect of this on this occasion. But there was something that became his thorn in the flesh. There was something that buffeted him. There was something that kept him from glorying above measure. Notice as well as we look at this, there shined round about him a light from heaven. Heaven is the source of this light. He fell to the earth. Most commentators will talk about him falling off of his horse, or falling off of the beast upon which he was riding. That may very well be the case, but you can fall to the earth without being on a beast. And so he could have been traveling on foot and merely fallen to the earth when this happened. We can't necessarily be dogmatic about what he was riding on and exactly how far he fell to the earth. We simply know that he fell to the earth. He heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? He heard a voice. Others heard a sound, but he heard a voice. It was distinctive for him, saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Notice the double use of his name. Saul, Saul. There are about 15 times, as I understand it, in the Scriptures where a double reference to a name is used. Here are some of the occasions where that's the case. In Genesis 22, where Abraham is offering Isaac, God calls out, Abraham, Abraham. We have Moses at the burning bush. Moses, Moses. We have Samuel, as God is communicating with this young boy, who is, of course, being raised by Eli at that time. Samuel calls out to him. We have David, learning of the death of his son and calling out, "Oh, Absalom, Absalom." We have Elisha, who saw Elijah go to heaven, and he cried out, "My father, my father." Double use of that reference. In Luke chapter 10, we have Jesus saying, "Martha, Martha." In Matthew 23, we have Jesus crying out, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem," calling out the double use of the name of that city. From the cross, Jesus cried out, "My God, my God." And so these are some of the references, most direct references, where a double use of a name is found. Why do you think that in these occasions, and I suppose there could be different reasons varying by the occasion, but why was the name called twice? Do you have any idea as to why maybe God did that? Saul, Saul. Okay, emphasizing displeasure. Sometimes maybe our mom or our dad might have said, "Wade, Wade." Right? I'm just amazed that you've done this. And calling it that way. Sometimes they called us by our middle name, right? Or maybe they even called us by the name of someone else. For example, I've heard my mom call my sister Jezebel before. And maybe your mom did that. Maybe you called them the name of some Bible character because of the way they were acting. I don't know. Maybe that's the case. What are some other reasons? Okay, it can be a term of endearment. It can be just the saying of a name in a way that shows, I adore you, I love you. The beauty of the name and the double expression of it may be the case. Okay, to make sure you get their attention, capture their attention. Call their name twice, make sure that they've heard you, make sure that they're focusing in. And sometimes we have to do that with children, right? We have to call them more than once because we call them once and and they don't respond. So we call them 2 times very quickly to make sure that we have their attention. I think that's a good reason. Other reasons maybe. Most commentators that I've read with these uses suggest that it's used in a double sense to suggest a very personal relationship, to get on a very personal level with someone. And so it is as if Jesus is saying, Saul, Saul. Really being on a very personal level with Saul and calling Saul's attention to something. Now, if that's the case, it's interesting in Matthew chapter 7, one of the instances that we didn't refer to here, you remember that on the day of judgment there are going to be those who are going to say, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in Thy name, and in Thy name cast out devils, and in Thy name done many wonderful works? Now, what are those people doing on the day of judgment? They're not getting on to the Lord, so they're not using it in that sense. They might be using in the sense of, oh, how much I love you, how much I appreciate you. They could be using it. They could be using it, I suppose, in the sense of getting the Lord's attention. But probably, in that occasion at least, they're using in the sense of, we have a very personal relationship. I know you in a personal kind of way. And Jesus' response would suggest that that's what they're claiming. Because what does Jesus say to them? I never knew you. I didn't know you that way. I didn't have that kind of relationship with you that way. You're claiming a relationship. You're saying that we had this wonderful relationship one with another, but Jesus said we never had that. We never were like. Have you ever had someone who you just barely knew? You didn't really know them. And they called you up and they made a huge request of you. And they acted as if you were their best friend or they had known you forever, and you're thinking, who are you? I don't remember you. And then maybe with the progression of time, oh, I do remember meeting you. But that's kind of the extent of how much you know them. But they claim a very personal, very intimate relationship, even though that was never developed. Here are people who are doing that with the Lord. But this is Jesus doing it with Saul. Saul, Saul. Now when we think about this, God loves each of us as if there is only one of us, right? It's true. For God so loved the world. But we can make it more personal than that. For God so loved, and you can put your name there. For God it was personal. God loved you to the extent that God sent His Son to die for you. It's very personal with God. We also have to think that it's very personal with God because God knows every one of us in a way that we don't even know ourselves. He knows the very thoughts, the very intents of our heart. He knows us in that sense. Now, we may spend a lifetime with another person and never fully know them that well. But God knows us that well in an instant. He's able to look directly inside of us and see our thoughts and even see the intents of our heart. Not merely what we have done or maybe not even what we have thought, but what we're going to think He can see. And in fact, the Bible says that He sees our thoughts afar off. Oh, God can see our innermost thoughts at the greatest of distances. And so it is personal when He calls to us because He knows us even when we don't know Him. And He knows all about us even though at this time Saul didn't know very much about Him. You remember Nathanael in John chapter 2, and you remember Nathanael's amazement because Jesus says to Nathanael, I saw you where? I saw you underneath the fig tree. Nathanael's thinking, Lord, how'd you see me there? Lord, that's my special place. That's where I go to get away from everyone. That's my hiding place. How did you see me there? But the Lord knew all about. The Lord said to him, behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile. Now, at that moment, Nathanael didn't know him, but he knew all about Nathanael. In fact, he knew so much about Nathanael, he could say of Nathanael, Nathanael, there's no guile in your heart. There's no evil intention, evil spirit, evil attitude in your heart. You don't have any guile. He knew him that well, even on their first meeting. And so he's able to say to Saul, 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 because he knows all about Saul. And in fact, if you think about this, and other chapters 22, 26 of Acts will reveal this, at this very moment, Jesus knows what Saul is going to be. He knows what Saul is going to become. And the call is going to say, you're going to be the apostle to the Gentiles. The Lord already saw that. The Lord already knew that. The Lord has the ability to do that. He's doing that with Saul here. Very, very personal way He's addressing him. Now, when we think about Saul opposing Christ, it's just amazing to consider the change that's going to come about in this man. He's going to be, we sometimes talk about a person going in this direction and turning and going in the opposite direction. You look at everything he was doing up to this point, and then after this point, he's headed in the opposite direction. He's doing the opposite of what he's done up to this point in his life. It's conversion. And we see that in him. It says, he fell to the earth and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? The idea of persecution here, the tense is, why do you keep on persecuting me? It's not a one-time act. It's a repeated action on his part. Why do you keep on doing this? Persecutest thou me? Why are you persecuting me? Now notice Saul's response, and he said, Who art thou, Lord? Now he's not using Lord, and many denominational commentators will bring this out because they want him converted. They want him saved on the road to Damascus. And so they will say that he used the term Lord in the sense of a confession. You gotta be careful about turning your head up. They want him to use it in the sense of a confession. But that's not the way it's used here. It's used in the sense of just respect. Who art thou, Lord? He didn't know who he was. This can't be a confession because he doesn't know who he's talking to. Who art thou? Now, he is smart enough to realize whoever he's talking to is up there and he's down here. And he's smart enough to realize there was a bolt of light that knocked me to the ground. And so as I'm talking to you, I'm going to use the utmost respect. Because I've already been knocked to the ground, and you're up there and I'm down here. And so it just makes sense that that's the way I'm going to speak. That's practical. But he doesn't know who it is yet. He's not been told who it is yet. And in fact, he never would have in his wildest dreams imagined who it was. Whoever he thinks it is, he doesn't think it's Jesus. I can tell you that much. I don't know who he thinks it is. He may think it's Gabriel or somebody. I don't know who he thinks it is, but he doesn't think it's Jesus. Because he's coming to Damascus to persecute those that follow Jesus. He's not expecting to meet Jesus. That's not who he's confessing. Whatever he's saying, he's trying to gather information. And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. I am Jesus. Can you imagine? He's already been knocked to the ground. The picture I have in my mind, at least, is this voice speak. He's lifted himself trying to lift himself up to some extent. And then comes, I am Jesus. Knocked right back down to the ground again, right? Not what I was expecting. Not who I was expecting to hear. I am Jesus. Now, can you imagine, as soon as he heard that name, he has warrants with him. And these warrants are for anyone who follows Jesus. Here is the Lord saying, I am Jesus, and He has these warrants in His hand. How would you have felt? It is like, and we've got to stop, we've got folks at the back door, but just think about this. You remember when Joseph's brothers come down to Egypt, they're before this great powerful man in Egypt, they don't know who he is, and Joseph says, I am Joseph. You remember me? You remember how his brothers acted? Well, here is even a greater occasion where Saul hears, I am Jesus. There's a lot of parallels between Joseph and Jesus, but we'll stop there and pick up, Lord willing, next time.